Well, hello. My name is Brendan. I am joined today by Max, Brooke, and Luke Eddy. We are here for another countdown to Stonesaga episode. Max, Luke, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So maybe but before we jump into things, for those of you who are joining us, this is episode 2. We're kind of doing a big lead up to our Kickstarter campaign, which has a tentative date in February. Right now, at the beginning of February, we're really excited about how it's gearing up. The first episode, I just did a little solo intro into the big idea, and each week we're doing a blog post, a live stream, Q&A, whatever it is, on a different topic leading up to the launch. We'll probably pause a couple weeks for Christmas, but hey, here we are. So as you're joining us, if you have questions, make sure to leave them in on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're joining. You can leave the questions in the comments. And at the end of this, we're going to kind of talk through the questions and answer as much as we can. For those of you who are listening to this podcast or after, thanks for joining in. You make sure to join our Discord or our Facebook groups, and you can continue on the conversation there. Okay, with that said, maybe let's just do some introductions. Max, how about you go first? Maybe who are you? A little brief bio, and what is your role with Stonesaga?
So my name is Max Brooke. I'm a freelance game designer. I live in Minnesota, and I am one of the 2 designers on Stonesaga. I happened to arrive on the project first, but I that's only a matter of chronology, really. So I've been working on Stonesaga with Brendan pretty much since you had the inciting idea, right?
Yeah. It's been a while. I think is it 2 years? I don't even know.
It's coming up on it. And it's been an incredible ride so far, and we're not even done yet, but it's been a ton of fun to get everything together as we start to count down to the Kickstarter, which I'm very excited for. Prior to working on Stonesaga and going freelance, I was at Fantasy Flight Games for a number of years. I worked on role-playing games. I worked on X-Wing the Miniatures game, all sorts of stuff like that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Max. Luke.
Yeah, I'm Luke Eddy, also in Minnesota. I'm the other designer on Stonesaga, and turns out Stonesaga has a lot of content. This game is going to have a lot of cards and a lot of tokens. And Max asked me if I would help save him from the amount of work that he had made for himself.
I realized I was in over my head.
But I was happy to get on board. I mean, I've worked with Max before. I was at Fantasy Flight Games. I worked primarily on Star Wars Legion. But we worked on minis games there, but we talked about a lot of other games. We talked about a lot of cool ideas and certain sorts of genres we would like to see in more board games, more mechanics, borrowing from other genres, even outside of board games. And so when I had the chance to work on a board game with Max, I said yes right away. It's been great. And we're looking forward to this game coming out and talking more about it leading up to that.
Yeah, and hey, thanks Max and Luke for the interest. It's been fun to work with the both of you over the past year and a bit. It is interesting kind of as we continue to talk these high level ideas with Stonesaga. I'm always reminded we've shown very little. I want to say actual content of the game. We haven't shown any playthroughs and stuff, and we're gearing up in the next over the next month. Our TTS build is actually, I think, wrapping up today, which is fantastic. Our first prototype from China is finishing up, I was told, on November 15th, which is really exciting. And so I'm actually going down and to Minneapolis and visiting Max and Luke at the end of the month, and we'll have some photos and some updates then. But we're excited, and we're going to continue this conversation, this high level conversation on Stonesaga. Last week talked about this idea, and I think first of all, I had a blog post, and I think some people got a little bit nervous when I said that they are going to be instructed to do some like cave painting, cave sketching. And I think that the nerves actually emanated from the fact that many of us are board gamers are not actually great artists or great drawers. And I would, when Max and I were first talking about this, we were like, yeah, we're no good at actually drawing ourselves. But this is what we're asking you to do. When, let me just show you a card illustration, because let's just clear this up. We're going to talk about it a little bit more too. But when we're asking people to kind of illustrate on their wall for gameplay purposes, this is what level of illustration. And you know what? There's some artists among you who are going to be playing Stonesaga. Maybe you're not the ones buying the game, but your friends are, and you're going to be sitting there throughout your 2-hour-long session of Stonesaga, and you're going to make like this one mark into this incredible masterpiece. And for the rest of us, hey, we're going to either enjoy that or just make these marks, and it'll be cool regardless.
Well, and the other thing too about the marks, and this is something we felt very important to it was very important to the idea of this primal cave wall, is anytime the game instructs you to illustrate a new saga on the wall, the only mechanically important part is the mark. The only thing the game will check later is like, hey, did you draw this mark on there? Great. And you can just put the mark on there, and that is completely comprehensive if you need it.
Yeah. Quality doesn't matter.
Quality doesn't matter. But if you want to, you can also do any sort of like embellishments around that mark. So like when I drew that mark in the board, I did, and it looked very bad. There was, a little trail of like stick figures going toward it where they had, they built their village, and that was the event. And I think one of them was dead because somebody had died on the journey. And so,
and don't worry,
some details like that.
Yeah, we won't ask you to draw anything like this. This is from our artist with different kind of cave sketches of some of the behemoths. We'll talk about that more, but we won't ask you to draw anything like that. Okay, so with that, go ahead.
I was going to add one brief aside about that, which is that I think the art director Taryn has done a great job with the marks as a study in minimalism. She's done a really good job making those like very drawable, because I sort of sent the ideas to her, and then she came back to me with some images, and then I said like I don't know if I can draw these, and she really did some great, like they're very approachable and easy but evocative in a fun way.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so jumping into today's topic, world building. So the world of Stonesaga. Max, maybe I'll direct this to you. Where did you start? Where did we start with this?
Well, we started with the idea of drawing on the primal cave wall, and I think I don't remember if you said it to me or you were sort of expressing an idea around it, but I remember the words prehistoric fantasy came up. That was what we wanted. We wanted a fantasy, but we wanted the themes of prehistoric humans and sort of the visual and aesthetic elements of that. And so when we sat down to draft the concept and started talking this out, and I started reading a little bit more, it quickly became apparent that the words prehistoric and fantasy are both really big in terms of the content they cover. There is a lot of prehistory. There's a lot more prehistory than there is history, in fact.
Yeah.
Even only including the prehistory after you have real world humans. So, so we needed to figure out more specifically what were we looking at. And so, we started to drill down. And this is something where, especially when Luke and I started working on the project, we started to drill down and say, okay, well, we want to look at, a lot of these Neolithic technologies. We're not making any sort of simulation of the real world. We're just looking for inspiration. But, what were the, technologies, that Neolithic peoples were developing, and what were they looking at? How were they, interacting with the world around them that we can see the evidence of? Because of course the interesting thing is, going back 12,000 or more years, we have stones and some bone fragments and such, but obviously they would have been doing a lot of stuff with wood that is not around anymore. So, filling in those absences is interesting.
And Luke, I know that for you, there's actually something really neat when we combine prehistoric and fantasy. Maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, are you referring to sort of the player perspective that I'd mentioned before? Yeah. Well, and I think so when I came on the project, Brendan and Max, you had sort of come up with this idea of like this, sort of prehistoric but fantasy, and sort of some of the ideas of like what sort of the core I guess gameplay pillars of the game, like exploration, survival, those sorts of things. And so I think what clicked with me was that that sort of early human experience, the world is sort of a fantastical place. I mean, you don't have modern science, so like every normal things in the world seem mysterious. You don't know how things work, what even is the night sky and planets and things like that. And so if this game was just a one-to-one, as Max said, like simulation of like, just straight, actual human prehistory, I think it would lose sort of a bit of that experience for the player, where by having the setting of Stonesaga have these sort of fantastical elements, the player can't like just know ahead of time, what everything means, how everything, works in this world. There's, animals you've never seen before, strange predators. There's these huge behemoths. There's a lot of normal materials like wood and sort of some more common sorts of stones, fiber from plants. But then there's also sort of like strange metals and, different colored stones, weird plants. And having those elements in the game, I think, helps give the player sort of an analogous experience to sort of an early human sort of wonder at the universe, where like not everything really makes sense. There's a lot of associations sort of that connect different elements of the world together, sort of a cosmology, which is something we'll talk about more. But I think that fantasy element really lends to those sort of game pillars of exploration and discovery and survival.
I think that's really well put, Luke.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I think that's great. So maybe we I don't know, Max, unless you have anything else to say on like the prehistoric or the fantasy elements, do we want to touch base on the behemoths at all, or is that something for a future day?
Well, the behemoths will definitely get a little bit of their due here. Let's talk a little bit about the behemoths as they relate to fantasy, actually, because that's sort of one of the pillars. Is whenever you introduce fantastical concepts into a setting, you have to think about what are the relevant ways in which those fantasy elements are going to play. Like what associations with real world things will your fantasy elements have? And for these behemoths, we wanted them to really be these sort of personifications, because in some ways they are the face of the game almost more than any individual character you play, since they will recur across numerous games and even different, ages of history. There are these sort of personifications of, like natural forces. And, like natural forces, sometimes, you have, big catastrophes, a volcano goes off that applies very quickly. But a lot of the time, the natural forces that are pressing upon organisms in an environment are doing so in a very slow, but nonetheless sort of like overwhelming way. And they're sort of so big you can't see them or conceptualize them. And so for our fantasy element and to sort of help the player dig into it, we wanted to be like, all right, well, let's conceptualize these things. Let's, like personify them a little bit. They're still these strange and alien creatures, but they are, like something you can sort of interact with physically and, have a relationship with, in the way that, again, through these like many smaller interactions you might have, societal relationship with in the real world, but it wouldn't be as neat and concrete and cinematic as an encounter with a giant monster, right? But this way you have these very like tangible, like representations of these things. But also each behemoth has a degree of interpretability. The behemoths are not particularly good or evil. They're organisms in an environment just like you. And so, your society and the relationship you define with the behemoths will change over the course of the game, depending on your decisions. And, so there is, and, the role they have in your story will depend on your choices and what you sort of decide your characters are interpreting them as.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, we have prehistoric fantasy. I want to kind of move us along to the next kind of, I guess, theme. Through line, probably through line is a good kind of word for the omens.
Cosmic building block.
Yeah, cosmic building blocks. That's great. So Luke, Max, yes, speak to the omens and their place. Let's start with like the story, the world building, but maybe we can even take a step further and be like, okay, what mechanical purpose do these omens have?
Absolutely. Well, Luke, I think the omens were your idea, actually, or at least they came out of a discussion we were having together.
Yeah, well, I don't think I think the omens were pretty collaborative because I think you had some early concepts and I think we just kind of ran with them. And I think sort of solidifying this as like sort of a theme for Stonesaga really helped us flesh out a lot of other ideas and mechanics. So the omens in Stonesaga, there's comet, a moon, sun, clouds, and stars. Stars are not here for some reason. I don't know why, but pretend there's stars on there.
This was a visual representation I liked from this is actually how they sometimes appear in game in various representations, which I kind of liked sharing in this case. So like you have a very literal cloud, but then you might also have a like
an abstract sun,
abstract mark that evokes the sun. So they will appear in different ways on different game components.
Right. Yeah. So I think just to touch on the omens apart from mechanics, which I think is interesting because like we've tied in the omens through some mechanics, but I think our initial conception of these omens was to drive sort of the theme of the game and sort of like the lore, if you will, the background sort of cosmology. I think something that what's a good example? I mean, mention another game I'm sure a lot of people were playing this year, Elden Ring. Elden Ring does a great job of just steeping the world you're in lore, right? That doesn't even have any influence on gameplay. And I think we wanted to achieve a little bit of that with these omens. And the omens are sort of like, what would a people have as sort of a loose sort of cosmology for the world they live in when they see, different elements in their universe and sort of try to associate them together. And so we came up with these 5 things that, had some sort of, a lot of sort of mundane applications. I mean, sun was associated with field and grain and warmth, and also became sort of associated with sort of people and humans and building and sort of villages and that sort of thing. And then clouds naturally sort of were associated with storms, but then also mountains and sort of exploring and courage and strength and sort of permanence. But also because of the storms, you have change. And then we kind of like riffed on that with other things where we had associated rivers and stars together. You look at pictures of like the Milky Way galaxy, when you're totally away from civilization and you see those huge swaths of stars in the sky that almost look like a river in the sky. And one of the elements we had in the game as a resource already was a sort of stone that you would flake or break to be sharp, flint basically, that we had been calling, I think we named it River Stone. And so we're like, okay, so stars and the river also sort of have this abstract concept of like sharpness and cutting through things. Anyways, these are all examples of like omens not being associated with gameplay necessarily, but helping us sort of drive home associations between things and sort of themes for the player to pick up on. And like once we came up with these 5, Max, I think it helped us inform what we wanted to do with these in game. Associating certain elements and abilities with each other, even if they're not mechanically associated, just sort of thematically associated. I think it helped drive our art, made our art more evocative, but also helped the artist, Andrea, sort of associate certain things and bring out certain themes. Even color palette wise, each of these 5 things sort of had their own sort of color palette. And so it really helped sort of like behind the scenes tie in a lot of things together, thematically and mechanically. So it was really helpful for us, honestly, behind the scenes. And it's all kind of, again, going on in the background and sort of a thing that we hope kind of players also pick up on, that a lot of these are just, associations. They're not direct references to each other. It's sort of incidental. You see things next to each other and make those associations on your own a little bit. It's implicit rather than explicit.
Yeah, well, and speaking of those associations, one of the important things is sort of back to the idea of sort of these cosmological building blocks is, Stonesaga is about, determining the saga of telling the saga of, your people as they enter this valley, as they explore, as they learn things, as they encounter challenges. And so the omens having this set of loose associations, but not a lot of explicit connections necessarily, it really helps them. They'll have different meanings based on, like what behemoth you encounter. They'll have different meanings based on what, like resources are rare or common in the, semi-procedurally generated, area you live in. And so we wanted to keep that. We wanted to keep they do have a concrete mechanical hook, which we could talk about in a second, but we wanted to keep a lot of them sort of like open to interpretation so that when you're thinking about them and you're, adding them to your saga and embellishing them into your art or what have you, something, some of that will be brought by you and brought by the story you've told and the pastoral they've had in it. In terms of their mechanical, go ahead.
Well, no, I was gonna segue us into 2 kind of mechanics, and I have the knight card and a hex queued up.
Oh, perfect.
Mm-hmm. Should I show the knight card?
Yeah, show the knight card.
Okay, here we go.
So each knight card has got an omen in that bottom right corner, and so every night you get a new active omen for the next day, and on many of the other game components, there are little secrets that are hidden away that you can check whenever that omen is active. So, for instance, not to give too much away, but you might see on this component, if you look closely, there's a symbol that kind of resembles one of the omens. And so when you see that symbol, if the current omen matches the symbol you think you see, you can investigate. And to do that, you go into the codex, which is sort of this book of recipes and answers and all these things. And you check the game component ID on the table for that omen. You look that up and it says, oh, you found something. Or if you didn't find anything, maybe, you maybe there wasn't anything there, but in that case, you would find something for that one if you picked the correct omen.
Yeah, some of these that's an example of one that I think is pretty easy to find. There are others that are much more hidden, shall we say. And I think the cool thing too, also, like, not to like spoil anything, but like there are also other components you'll find as you play more of the game that care what the omen is currently, or like your current omen, because of like what night card is on the top of the discard pile. I mean, for example, I mean, there are behemoth mechanics where the behemoth cares what the omen is. Depending on what the omen is, its behavior may change. But there's other even more subtle ones that I think will be fun to discover.
As the behemoth one is a good example of how the omen's meaning might be very different in two different playthroughs, because if you have a different behemoth running around and there's going to be more than one in the box, one omen that is, you associate that with these other things. You might talk to someone else and they say, oh yeah, every time that omen came up, our village got burned down.
Yeah, and it is neat to see, like, one of the kind of tenets, and it's a mechanic and it's not, but it's this idea of like art-driven gameplay. And the layer behind that is what we're talking about. So it's like world building driven art, which then drives gameplay, which is really, really neat, right? So what you see in some cases is what you can do, and so you see an omen, and just like in a fantasy epic, you would be able to interact with that omen in some way, and there's mysteries to solve, and it would be interesting if. There's probably some completionists out there who, when they get Stonesaga and they play it, they will like scour every piece of material component. They'll unlock every single thing. But I imagine most people will be playing, and after whatever multiple playthroughs, they'll be like, oh hey, there's like something here I've never interacted with before, and that's pretty neat.
We very much want that sort of sense of wonder that, like, you're always finding out there were things in the game you didn't encounter to be a big part of it. And so, we've tried to design in a lot of little ways that will happen organically.
Okay, so just because I like to keep these to around 30 minutes, I know there's, we talked about this prehistoric fantasy, the omens, their impact on gameplay. Throughout all of this, right, we have this kind of core tenet of leaving your mark and leaving room for players to, I guess, in some ways read their own story into the world. And Luke, I think you mentioned it earlier, and I really like it, how our world building kind of is. It's really show don't tell. And so there's a lot more implicit than there is explicit, right? In all the different elements. And so maybe speak a little bit to that about how we do leave room and how we allow players to kind of leave their mark on this world.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a big part of what is appealing about Stonesaga is, and I know this is important to Max too, because a lot of what we built into this game sort of encourages sort of an emergent narrative for the players, finding an individual little omen that leads to like a special like lore entry that you read in the codex. That's a unique little thing that, may only happen to, 50% of players who play the game or fewer, and there's lots of other little small stories that can be told in the game. I mean, I think one of the strong points of Stonesaga is it has sort of a sandbox feel to it, where you're dropped into this world, and there's a whole bunch of different things you can do. You can fish, you can craft things, you can gather the resources to build structures, you can go hunting, foraging in different biomes that have different things you can find while hunting and foraging. I mean, there's tons of different things you can interact with, exploring. You draw cards, and those are like little mini events. Things happen at night. And all these different little hooks sort of help culminate into, sort of an emergent narrative for like what happened to those players, even an individual character, like we encourage you pick a name for your character you're playing, and later you get to like pick abilities for them. You get to pick like keywords they have that, like you may make a character and he gets to be, intrepid. That doesn't do anything in game, but a card may say, you may draw a card that's like, oh, you're getting, you have to cross some river. You get some bonus if you're intrepid. It's like, oh yeah, my character's intrepid, I have a bonus to this, great. And that becomes a little mini story of like, this character was really good at overcoming this obstacle. And all the characters together doing that are also going to have this sort of story of what happened to their group, their tribe of people. And so I think like all of these sort of things coming together to sort of like give each playthrough of Stonesaga a very unique feel, a very individualized sort of feel as players interact with all these different mechanics and have all these different hooks that, as they sort of accrue, it kind of becomes this story of your game of Stonesaga.
Yeah, and I would just add to that the Primal Cave Wall is sort of the place to really unleash your imagination on that. But it's not the only place. There's also the journal, and you'll have the opportunity to write down all sorts of little details in there. So, if drawing's not your strong suit, which is certainly true for me, but you like to write, which is certainly what I'm better at of the two. There's an opportunity to write down like, oh, what were the trials and travails of your characters this game? And so it's like, well, Blugthar did not have a good day. He did not have a good week. He did not have a good month. He fell in the river and he came out somewhere else entirely in a new area. And then he spent a bunch of time trying to get back. And by the time he got back, the village was on fire and, there you go. So there's like lots of ways to sort of create this like record of what's happened. And we wanted to make sure that that's like, very accessible on a lot of different axes.
Oh yeah. One quick example. I think one of the coolest ways that works is we've talked about how the game takes place over different like eons. So like you may have characters that, have passed away or, through, natural causes or otherwise. But those characters become legends, and like you should, write down what happened to them, but then like their story, their legend can impact a later game, literally because their card can be used, after once they're done being a character, they become a legend. There's like another side of their card. I think that's a really cool way too, that like even what happened way past to previous characters in previous games, can still, jump forward into a current game much later.
Yeah. And I think on that note, well, sorry, I'm just showing a little bit more artwork, but I think on that note, let's pause. If you want to know more of the world building that has gone into Stonesaga, make sure to go to the Board Game Geek page. You can just search Stonesaga with Board Game Geek, and in a little bit, Max will be posting a little blog post. You can ask any questions there. You'll be interacting there. But again, engage in the conversation in our community groups. Thanks everyone for joining in. Luke, Max, any kind of parting thoughts?
No.
Stay tuned for more exciting stuff.
Yeah. I guess I'm happy people are excited about this. That's great.
Yeah, it'll be fantastic, and we'll have Max and Luke on, kind of on and off over the next kind of few months as we lead up to the Kickstarter launch. But until then, hey, thanks for joining us. We're looking forward to sharing more content with you all, and I think that's it. All right, take care, everyone.